Hello, friends. Thank you so much for spending time with me. My name is Bethny, and this is the All In Conference. I have been looking forward to having this conversation with you for months. And though we were meant to be in person, God has shown us throughout 2020 that He is fully capable of meeting us right where we are. And so it is a privilege to take time to talk to you a little bit about my journey within the context of finding God in the fire. All of us have had various experiences in our life where we have wondered, where is God? Or what I would say is, I'm sorry, are you seeing this? Are you seeing what's happening right now? And so that can show up in small ways, and it can also show up in big ways. But let me tell you how I found God in the trauma and pain and hurt that I experienced for about 13 years. So I was married for 10. And in that 10-year marriage, there was a lot of pain and hurt and trauma that I experienced. And a lot of it happened privately. And as I was going through that, there were countless times where I would be praying and wondering if God heard me. There was a period of time where I actually forgot what God's voice sounded like. And here's what I want you to understand. I think there's this thought, at least one that I had, so I can talk about myself. I'm not going to talk about everybody else. I'll talk about myself. That if I'm not hearing God, then something must be wrong with me. But as I continued to move through this valley, it wasn't that something was wrong with me. It was more so that I was distracted. There was no sin in my life. I wasn't privately sinning and, not having conversations with God. But I was also distracted, and I was distracted because I didn't want to acknowledge what was happening around me. I was living a facade by all intents purposes. I had this booming career, and have still this booming career, wildly successful. Well, in America, when you're wildly successful, the assumption is everything else must be great. So clearly, she's doing wonderful professionally. So things must be aligned spiritually within her marriage, within her children, etc. But I was going through a private turmoil. And in that, my relationship, that intimacy with God started to part because I didn't want to talk to him, because what I wanted him to be was a genie. I didn't want to acknowledge what was happening. I didn't want to ask him the tough questions. I just wanted to say a prayer, and I wanted the pain to be gone. But here is the issue for me. And again, I'm going to talk about me because I do not want this to come off as I'm making any sort of judgments about the decisions people are making in their own life. My hope is that you can look at the way I've lived and take some lessons from my mistakes that I've made or the aha moments that I'm having. But back to my point. I did not want to acknowledge what was happening around me. So I allowed myself, sometimes on purpose, to be distracted about the things going on in my world, professionally and personally, because it hurt too much. The pain was too deep to kind of say, time out, God. Where are you? And so as I went through this journey and things around me started to untether, and things around me felt like they were crumbling, and I wasn't happy on the inside. I don't care about the outside. We live in a world that is so focused on what's going on the outside. We spend very little time focused on what's actually happening inward. And I was not willing, and I didn't have the courage at the time to focus on what was happening inward. And the reason I didn't have the courage to do it is because fundamentally, there was a question that I wanted to ask God. Where are you? You are omnipresent. You're in my future, you're in my present, and you're in my past. Why don't I feel like you're showing up for me? What is happening? I am your daughter. I am your child. This should be all going away. Now, I disregarded all the stories in the Bible where people had some pretty long valleys and some pretty serious challenges, because that's Bible. And God is different, right? Like, he's different from the New Testament God versus the 2020 God or the 2017 God or the 2006 God, right? But the Bible tells us God doesn't change. And so for me, again, the challenging question was, where are you? Because I'm super confused. And though I say that a little tongue-in-cheek right now, that was a deep hurt for me. And then I will fast forward and then jump back. I did come to the realization, and it's amazing where you read Bible scriptures, so you read the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They're in the fiery furnace. How many times have we heard that story? I've heard it, I've read it, I've shared it, with my children, in speaking engagements, and then there was, a fourth person who showed up. But countless times throughout my journey, distinctly this year, God has reminded me, one of the key principles of that story is I was present with them in that moment. And that was a very hard pill for me to swallow. The first time I realized it, and then the second time I realized it, that I conceptualized that as things were happening to me, God was there. And immediately, at first I was relieved. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't go through that alone. But then I was angry because I was like, wait a minute, I didn't go through that alone. But the Bible doesn't tell us that God will take the burden away completely. Nowhere does it say that. He says he'll help carry it. He says his yoke is easy. That's what he tells us. But he doesn't say, I'm going to erase the pain. He doesn't say, I'm going to erase the hurt. Because at the end of the day, God knew what I wanted was for him to erase the memories. I wanted him to take everything away with no work on my part. But here was the fundamental problem. It was not aligned with my purpose. And I was not in a position 3 years ago to understand what my purpose would be. Had God told me 3 or 4 years ago, listen, everything that you went through, you're going to write a book about it, and you're going to call it An Inconvenient Journey. And then you're going to be speaking at a conference where you're going to talk about how you find God in the fire. If he had told me that 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said, you're crazy. Oh, and by the way, all of this is going to happen during a pandemic. I was not spiritually prepared or mature enough at that point in time, with all the God and all the Bible I had and all the faith. I would not have been able to digest that. And so that's where you put your faith in God. Because if I knew then what I know now, I would have said, okay, yeah, that makes sense because I see the end of the matter. But we don't have that ability because we're not God. But we do have faith. And throughout all of this, it was the faith that kept pulling me. It was the faith that kept drawing me, that belief that everything going on around me, even when I felt as though my world was crumbling. And in reality, it was a 10-year marriage with 2 children. As much as you may anticipate that that's ending, that is still a deep hurt. And trying to, and I'm going to be real, trying to keep up this facade. Yeah, it's fine. Everything's fine. Like, I got this. I can take care of my family. It's cool. I'll take care of the kids. I don't need anybody. But in the inside, there was this trauma that I was not willing to deal with, because there was an acknowledgement that needed to happen that I was human and I didn't have all the answers. The other piece, which is so wonderful about this title of Finding God in the Fire, you also have to be looking for him. And I wasn't looking. because he didn't answer my prayer when I wanted him to. Now, do not misconstrue what I'm saying. We serve a God who is fully capable of changing a situation and circumstance right now. And I'm also not saying that your valley is long because of you and anything that you're doing. What I experienced, none of it was my fault. Now, there was also a lot of therapy that I went through to help me lift that burden, but that's a different topic for a different day. But I was in a place where I wasn't looking for God. I was looking for a fix. I needed something to take all of this away. And the fix for me was distraction. It was work. It was children. That's the need. That's how I filled that need, which was superficial and temporary and quite surface. And so at some point that came to a head because you have to fill your cup. And so the pull of faith was always something that I was able to lean back on, but I was also spiritually starved because there was something else that I was frustrated about. I was angry with God. In the Bible, it talks about wrestling with the Lord. And some people scoff at that, like, why would I wrestle? Like, he is God. Is that okay? It's absolutely okay, and it's absolutely necessary. But I wasn't willing to wrestle at the time. I was ready to be fed through by distraction. But I did come to a point where there's the faith that helped me find God, but there was also the willingness to wrestle with God and ask the really, really tough questions and be willing to hear the answer. So when I was finally asking the question with an ear to hear and an ear to receive, where were you? His response, I was right there. But why didn't you pull me out? I did pull you out because I was working on the situation and circumstance right as you were going through it, because I work everything together for good to those who trust and believe, right? So there is an additional part of that scripture. And so as I start to reflect back and look at my journey, I can point to, okay, this is how he showed up. Okay, this is how he blocked and tackled for me. Okay, this is when he gave me strength when I was weary. This is when he gave me wisdom when I was fatigued, right? And when you're going through it, it is so hard. It is so hard. And I know that because I've been there, and we've all been there, right? Where the burden, it's like you're carrying it and you don't even know how to put it down. It's like, I don't even know how to put this down. Your word says put it down. I have no idea how to put it down. And so I wrestled with that. Like, God, you're telling me to put it down. I have no idea how to put it down. And for me, the put down was control. I had to relinquish control to God. And when I did that, I saw him in a different way. I saw the compassion. I saw the empathy that he had for me. I saw his willingness to repeatedly, over and over again, no matter how I was feeling, meet me right where I was, right there in that present moment. Think about the different things that you've gone through in your life where God has just shown up, no questions asked, shown up without you even asking, right? There are times where I didn't even realize I needed him until after the fact. And I'm like, okay, that was God showing up for me. And it's hard when you're in the midst of the storm and the clutter and the circumstance to see him. But if you're not looking for him, you're not going to be able to find him. And that is the spiritual exercise, that no matter what, no matter how deep the grief, and grief can show up in a lot of different ways, no matter how deep the hurt, no matter the static around you, look for him. Because if you are looking for him, he will meet you where you are. And it shows up in various ways. Sometimes it's a word from the Lord from somebody you know, you don't know. Sometimes it's reading a scripture that pops up off the page in a way that you've never seen before. And that's the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for me. Seeing how God didn't pull them out of the furnace. He didn't send this like rush of water down to like just put the flames out. That's not what he did. He was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get in there with them. And because I'm in there with them, they will not be burned, they will not be singed. We're gonna have a little conversation. And then they're gonna walk out conquerors and victorious and be able to say, had it not been for the Lord who was on my side. All right, that's the testimony. If it had not been for the Lord who was on my side. So back to my story. So I'm going through this valley and I start wrestling with God. Now, all the while, I am a writer. So I referenced earlier, I wrote a book called An Inconvenient Journey. And it's a short book, but I didn't know I was writing the book. Let me explain. So while all of this is happening, as I'm dealing with the trauma, wrestling with single motherhood, a demanding professional career that is not letting up. And now I'm a full-on provider. I'm the only one providing. I start writing. And I do it for fun, just because, an outlet for me. In the evenings, I would write and then I'd post. Then I'd go about my day, write and post. And I never gave context around what I was posting in the past. I would just kind of write these poems. I'm not a trained poet. So God was really slowly maturing me into this space. And I was not writing about things that were overly spiritual either. But there were times where certain things about my life would show up in what I wrote, and I wouldn't tell anybody. But I would still post it because I knew that I couldn't be the only one, right? And then we fast forward to this year. At the start of 2020, if you had told me what I would be doing, I would say, well, this year I'm probably going to be on planes a lot, as I typically am, traveling around the world. And I am going to be in Costa Rica, and I'm going to be in South Carolina, and I'm going to do kind of all of these things, and, you know, we're going to take a vacation for Christmas. That's kind of where my head was. COVID happened. Now I'm at home. And August of last year, I had been approached about self-publishing a book with a company, and I said, okay. And I was wrestling with what the topic was. And I had a meeting scheduled to get an update, to give an update and provide kind of a status of what was going on. Now, through this all, I am still, wrestling with God. Because here's the thing about healing, and then I'll get back to my point about the book. Healing is not always automatic. And I think we have to be really honest about that. And sometimes wounds show back up in different ways. And for me, when that would happen, I would feel like a failure. Like, oh, I thought I had already crossed this bridge. Oh, I thought I had already tackled this. And there would be shame that came with that, because I would expect more of myself. Because in my mind, I still wanted in some way for God to show up as this genie, but I didn't know what my purpose was. So I'm bringing this all together. I didn't fully understand what God was doing and why it took so long for me in the valley. So I'm sitting. Actually, I'm not sitting. I'm on my Peloton bike, which, there are those of us, once COVID happened and we couldn't go to the gym, we said, you know what, let's get a bike so we could work out at home. And so I'm up early in the morning and I'm on the bike and I have this meeting and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get this done. I don't know what I'm going to say. And God said, the book's already written. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So I dismissed it, because I sometimes dismiss what God says to me. I will admit that. I will dismiss and I will wrestle with myself. Did I really hear that? Was that like somebody else? I'm not really sure. I'll like him and haw, which I'm getting much, much better at. Especially once he told me that that's somewhat rooted in pride. Not somewhat, it actually is rooted in pride. But again, a different topic for a different day. But, I kind of dismiss it. I'm sweating. I'm at the end of this, ride. I'm tired. I'm like, oh my God. And I said, it's already written. And so I go to my Instagram and I scroll to the bottom on my desktop, which I don't typically do. I usually just operate everything from my phone. And I see the second poem that's currently in my book, An Inconvenient Journey, and it's called Delusions of Grandeur. And it is the very poem I wrote the night before my ex-husband and I separated. And I had forgotten it was there. I had forgotten that the gift that God had given me, that I was using, it didn't resonate with me, that the gift that God had given me was the mechanism that he was also using to heal me. And it was also one of the tools that he was using for me to find him. I'm gonna let that sit there for a second. Because I'm hoping right now in this moment you're thinking about your own life and thinking about how God may be using a gift, something that's very unique about you, to heal you from a situation or circumstance that you were in or that you're presently in. So I just kind of sat there for a second, and then I started scrolling up. And then there was the very next poem, and then the next one. And I became emotional because throughout these various posts was a story of healing, and was a story of me crying out to God, do you see me? And all the while, he had the pen and he was guiding me. Because again, had he told me, hey, everything you went through is going to show up in the form of poems in a book that you're going to publish during a pandemic, I would have said, you're crazy. You are crazy. I'm super private. No one needs to hear this. I'll never be ready. And yet here we are. And that is the book. So how did I find God? A little bit of faith. Because sometimes you don't have a lot of faith. I'm just going to be honest. It was a little bit of faith. And it was God taking a gift that he gave me, a skill that he gave me. He used that to help heal me. He is using it now to help heal me. But also, so look at the multiple levers he's pulling. It's aligning to the purpose that he has for me, which is to speak to women right now in their place of hurt and pain. To tell women, God sees you. He's in your tomorrow, and he's working it out for you. He sees every tear. He hears every cry. He hears every sigh. He's right there with you. And he will help you carry the burden. Just relinquish the control. Relinquish the worry, no matter how hard it is. And if you can't, surround yourself with women who will help you, who will pray for you, who will speak into your life, and be willing to admit that this is hard. Fire is hot. It's hot, and if you get too close, you get burned, right? So it's also about surrounding yourself, not isolating yourself. One of the biggest mistakes I made through this kind of 13-year time period, and it wasn't until I met a couple of women who helped me see this in my life. One of the mistakes I made was I would isolate myself, which I think is a direct attack of the enemy, right? Because if you isolate yourself, then you are trapped having conversations, and you have no one to tell you that it's wrong. You have no one to tell you that that's not true, that what you're thinking and feeling about yourself isn't right. And so you become more and more isolated. For me, I always say I would fold into myself, and I would be having conversations with myself. And it was until, I mustered the strength to pull myself out that I would maybe talk about it. I would never talk about it in the present moment. It was always after the fact, right? After I had overcome, not when I was going through it. We want to talk about things after the fact. And a part of that is human nature. And a part of that, I think, is the world that we live in. So we only talk about things once we have the solution to the problem. Well, for me, that wasn't very good, because I didn't know that my problem was going to last more than a decade. But God is patient, and He is kind, and He is faithful, and He is true, and He sees you. And He will send someone to pray for you, speak into your life. All you have to do is look for it. And it's not are you looking hard enough, right? Like, because sometimes you can fall into the religiosity of what I'm saying. The complex pieces are emotions. The non-complex piece is, God, I need you to show up. That's the prayer. So if you're listening to me right now and you're wondering, like, I hear you, Bethany, like it all sounds like really, really great, and I understand the word of God, but it's still, open your mouth and say, God, I need you. That's all you gotta say. God, I don't even know what to pray. There are times where I would pray that. God, I don't even have the words to pray. And He would show up for me. I have prayed that prayer this year. So that's not a prayer that's that I have prayed only once or twice. I have prayed that this year, and every time God in some way has shown up and demonstrated the fact that I see and hear you, and I'm working everything together for good. And so here we are in October of 2020. I am talking to you, and I'm a woman who prefers to be not seen. I wrote a book about a story in some way that I never thought that I would be sharing. But God knew you'll be able to tell your story without fully revealing all the shame or the private things. And it will resonate with people in a way that they will look to you, and I will say, so me, Bethany, will then say, look to Him. Because nothing that I went through was a burden that I could carry on my own, even when I wasn't willing to acknowledge that God was there with me. So here we are. And I'm not going to say that I'm not currently in a valley. I am. It's a different type of valley, but I'm stronger because of what I went through. Doesn't mean that I'm not attacked, that I'm not at times mentally weary, that it's not sometimes a fight with all. So I said all this. Yes, sometimes it's still a fight to be in my word, to reach out to friends and spiritual mentors or partners in Christ and say, I'm having a really hard time. I'm wading through a hard time. Even now, that happens. And I still love God. He is still the love of my life. I am still His daughter. So I think there's something to acknowledging that this is hard work at times. And God knows that. And He will send help. And He will send relief. He will send a servant. All you have to do is ask. I hope that my testimony has blessed you. I hope there are nuggets that you can take and apply in your own life. Because I believe that you are listening to me today, and the other women who are also speaking this week, for a particular reason. And I believe that if you ask God, I need you to show up for me. I need something. I'm starving for something, and I don't even know what it is. I do truly believe that He will meet you where you are. Thank you so much for your time today. Feel free to reach out on my Instagram account or my email. It really has been a privilege, and I hope that in the future we can be together in person. And until then, we can talk more and converse more. If you have any questions or you want me to drill down into something else later, please just let me know. But But again, it has been an honor, and God bless you.